Bonjour, merci pour vos
Good morning. Thank you for your presentation. It was very interesting. I have a question more for the organizers than the others. What are the female writers this morning? Where are the female writers? I think this is quite symptomatic because there are many events where we showcase literature, but you have so many panels with men. I'm not saying this to reduce or diminish the interest for your presentations and contributions, but I believe that women have things to share, things to say. But I think also that socially speaking, we have education around care, and you said it, Mr. Sheffen. So I think that women, writers, novelists, have interesting things to share. Thank you. We will have women asking questions in order to compensate somehow. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. If we say that literature is what we read and writing is what we write, if we position ourselves from Africa and we consider that we have literature, writing, and other forms, what is this subject telling you? If we talk about orality, the signs that we find in body scars, scarification, combined language, dances, what are the bonds? What is the cosmopoetics that could derive from it? Thank you. You can give the microphone to those who are sitting at the front row, and we'll stop there. Otherwise, we will not have time to take our questions. Thank you very much. It is fortunate that somebody took the floor before me to say that there were so many women here, but not on the panel. The first question, very quickly, regarding the library. So I'll start with the end. The library, is it only for reading, even though we talk more about readings? Now, the second question, it is for your neighbor, Alexander Jeffen. You said that literature is fabricating the missing community. So, when talking about relational literature, you mentioned both what is written, books, and also what goes through the digital space. But it seems like we should be told what the difference is. How do you perceive the difference? Maybe there's no difference, but tell us more about it. That is my question. For David Job, at the end of your presentation, you said that we all have to leave. But it seems like Adanson, like all the others that are giving names, taxonomy, etc., classification, since Aristotle. Now, the question I have is that are we not killing? Because it's about life, it's very important. So, in putting things in boxes, is it not a way of killing? Or the best way of killing? And for Wilfred Sunday, who started by telling us that he doesn't understand, it's just to say that this is the reason why, or one of the reasons why, he became a writer. It's not a question, it's more of a comment or a reflection. Thank you. Thank you very much, Madame Teneda Boni, writer. I'm being told that Felwin would like to answer to that appeal about women. Let's start from there. Thank you, Leila. I just would like to say that all the ateliers are about bonds. So do not read it around this round table. We have tried to have 52% of women and 48% of men. We have roundtables where we have 3 women, 2 women, or more women than men, and nobody would complain about this. Now, why are you debating about us having here 3 men and a woman? Because you saw that yesterday you had more women than men. This is the answer I have. Uh, Women are well represented, and we're talking about bonds, so women are totally involved. Thank you. We start with you, Wilfried. I did not really understand the questions. To be honest, David, would you like to start? Thank you, Wilfried. I will not imitate Wilfried. I'll try to answer. Try to be concise in your questions in the future. So, chaos in literature, that's what was asked first, if I'm not mistaken. It depends, according to me, on the Romanesque genre or figure of speech. Now, for the book, it depends on the type of book, because if you have a book around a tale, a story, you somehow structure the world, you give it standards, norms, you give it a meaning, you give a meaning to lives that are complex, that are more complex than what we could imagine. And I think that the figure of speech that would liberate writing from a specific order or rule is poetry and metaphors in poetry. So that's how I can answer to the question. I wouldn't want to speak for too long. I now remember the question. There were so many of them. I would say that when I'm writing, I'm actually creating, but I avoid writing for a specific purpose because the objective here is to create. I'm very much interested in working on the language, the format, and carry out literary experiments. And if it's disturbing or if it shakes up, why not? But it's not the primary objective. And what is surprising is what books produce. There are consequences that are unexpected. And that's what I'm looking for, actually. I prefer the surprise. I'll talk about myself because I believe that it's a beautiful story, but let me rather talk about the fifth character of my novel that was read by Isabel at the beginning. A character that was important in the story of the Congo Kingdom, and it's been published 400 years ago. But by writing this story, I was faced with so many consequences that was surprising. But we had the statue in Congo, and the name was given to that statue. It was integrated in books, learning materials in schools, and that was the impact of history. Now, I agree with you, Madam. Felwyn was right. However, I'm very proud because I have written a book, Jeunesse, and I had a character that was not gender sensitive because the French language is asking us to determine the gender, but we dreamed about a character that wouldn't suffer this standard. Avredou is the name of the character, and it is a suggestion. Please read it. You have freedom to answer to any of the questions. So is novel, a book, adding to the opacity of the world? Is it creating chaos, or would it be opposed to what we see in social storytelling? Maybe, but thinking about the world in its absurdity, its complexity, its density, thinking about the world in the competition of novels, it's organizing it, structuring it. That's the first response. Then the response of Madame, that was very interesting. I don't think that there is this soft or hard copy version of the book, acceleration, etc. There's a lot of literary creation on the social networks. I use Facebook a lot because I believe that it's an avenue for a lot of writing for many novelists to flourish, and I also read blogs. So we should try to make use of all these alternatives, intermediary forms, without any competition or opposition between what is working with electricity and what is working with paper and pen. Thank you very much for all these questions. I think that for the first question on chaos, I think that the cosmos is chaos. It's an opposition that is the basis of cosmogony, Greek cosmogony. I think that in literature, work, it's a solution, an easy solution, but it's also both. There is the neologism of chaosmos that exists. Chaosmos is both chaos and cosmos together, so it's mingled. What is disorganized and reorganized in another space or at another moment or at the same time. And I think that's the fundamental objective of literature. It's chaosmos. And this is making me reflect on more things. And I read recently that the philosopher Derrida went to the US at some point and was supposed to talk about chaos. He was supposed to talk about it in English, and he spent his time saying chaos. And at the break, students were saying, what the hell is that French philosopher talking about chaos? Because it was actually cows, COWS. So this is the importance of having an accent that is quite close to the original, but we don't care. We don't care about accents. Now, cosmopoetics, I think that we understood it differently. Just to answer to the second question by the lady, the word here that was asked a lot is about relations. It's a word with a double meaning. So relations, relating or talking about facts, events, and the bonds. So we need to insist on this duality of meanings, and all the stories be stories that build relations, whether they are written, physical, or immaterial. And I think that it's a beginning or an attempt to defining cosmopoetics, all forms of symbolizing, representing the world and society that would be at the same time a story but also a bond. So these are the two. I don't know if that was your question. I hope that Zemmour will not come around. For the names, now, is a library always for reading? No, I don't think so. All I was trying to say is that the library, if it's a place for reading, is also a place where you are being read or you are read. Because in this dimension of reading, you also have the reader with a book in a library. And it's also what I've attempted to say. The library is a place to reconcile with your inner self, because it's a place for the dead. That's what I was trying to say. Unfortunately, we will have to stop because if we want to break for coffee, I'll have to conclude this and you might continue the discussion around your coffee. What I would like to add is that I was very honored to moderate this session and it gives us a lot of food for thought. And I wish you great continuation in your reading, writing, and activities. Thank you.
Alors la pause café dure 15 minutes. Ça marche pas ça?
Je récupère mon sac.
Mais Ousmane Seydi, il a
Un, deux.
des choses excellentes sur l'histoire culturelle du Sénégal,
Non mais,
la pharmacopée.
Un, deux. Un.
mesdames, messieurs, la pause café dure 15 minutes. Donc nous retrouvons à 11h30 ici même. Si, je vous assure, ça va marcher.
faut commencer à les mettre. Bonjour à tous.
Good afternoon, everybody. So please settle down so that we can begin.
Rebonjour à toutes.
Good afternoon, everybody. After the panel of writers, I have the pleasure to introduce the one of ecofeminists on the theme Cosmopoetics of the Living, Ecofeminism and Economy of the Living. We are happy to have three panelists. Kumba Jengso, unfortunately, is not here. She is bereaved, apparently, and she's doubly sad. So we will not talk about boundaries this time after what we did yesterday, but we will have a bit more time since we have three panelists instead of four. So we will reduce the strict dictatorship and give them 20 minutes instead of the 15 that they have, and then we will take comments from the room. Felwin Sal will begin, and he will be talking about thinking about an economy of the living. She is professor in North Carolina and teacher in Gaston Berles, and he works on ecology of knowledge, contemporary philosophies in Africa, epistemology, economic anthropology. He is also a novelist, and he published Abit Merev Gariva. You have a little over 15 minutes to begin the discussions, Felwin. Thank you very much, Seydou. I'd like to say that I'm also delighted to be here and to be one of the panelists to share with you a few ideas on the economy of the living. Now, the main idea here is to say that there is a need to rethink the axiological foundations of the so-called neoclassic, neoliberal economy of the living on two premises. Our economy is metabolism affects the biosphere. We have said that over and over again, but these are facts. This is reality. Secondly, we have an economy which is experiencing a finality crisis, and the issue therefore comes, it is how to have an economic order which, by metabolizing the resources of the biotope, natural resources that it manufactures, and how therefore to preserve that and preserve regeneration. So have an economy which avoids the entropy of the living. And how? Obviously, how to rethink an economy whose finality includes the order of the living as a whole. When you talk about economy, you think about a system that meets our needs, we humans. And how, therefore, can we think about an economy which is not anthropocentric and which takes into account all living things in its processes? So its axiological foundations must be rethought, its theories and practices as well. Since the Industrial Revolution, we have entered an age where human activity has become the causes serious modifications of the Earth's ecosystem. And even if we're still debating it, the oceans, human activities destroy the biotope and creates more entropy. The world economy creates more waste and its metabolism negatively impacts the biosphere. To come back to the entropic nature of the dominant economy, which carbonizes the living, it imposes its type of production on the living, doesn't leave it enough time to regenerate, and endangers the conditions of reproduction of biological life, which we talked about even in the 1970s, and Hose and others working on this issue. This has become a reality, a tangible reality. In the 1970s, in fact, people started talking about it, and these are living realities today. And the GIEC also documents this experience that the lake chart, which lost in 40 years 90% of its surface. The lakes are out of the 55 million internally displaced in the world. The three quarters were due to climate change. So in 100 years, half of the living species have been destroyed. And as Bernard Stiegler says, we have we could write Anthropocene. And without the H, it would be the economy of the living. So we also note that this economy is technically, knowledge-wise, does not discharge its function, but endangers its own objectives. So economy since the 19th century, his objective was to contribute to the welfare of everybody, human communities, cities, geographies, territories, needs, and articulate their needs and activities that are non-natural. So these are social facts written history and in a context. And human beings did not wait for the economists to do economy. Economies is in disciplines, in the faculties of moral philosophy, and the ethics. They talked about an order and that meets the needs and allocates the right needs properly. And the needs were unlimited, and the resources being limited, you had to articulate the two together. We will see that these axiological definitions were being challenged for ethical reasons. So this economy of entropy, one of its symptoms is the inequality of revenues, of incomes, and causes a crisis. Most humans cannot satisfy their basic needs in the economic system. The crisis is not that in 2008 there was a financial crisis and then followed by a recurrent crisis. It's the promise of the economic order which is not fulfilled. Most of the people in the world cannot meet their needs and dignity. That is the real crisis. Also, the current economic order does not discharge its mandate ethically and axiologically, and most individuals have difficulty living a dignified life, and most of them have to struggle to find treatment and to feed themselves. And there's an opposition of the rich and the poor, with wealth in one part and poverty in others. And it's not the fact that some are cleverer than others, but it's a structural problem because of the distribution, modes of distribution, international distribution of labor, with unequal distribution of technology, and with the captation and the capture of the distribution of value added, and also with an imbalance in the markets, with monopolies by industrial states, and modernization has led to the privatization of the means of trade. You cannot, Ricardo talked about this, and we also learn this in university. So there should be a win-win situation. But when you evaluate this globalization, some win, and there's a privatization, and the risk and cost are borne by some to the detriment of others.
Et du présentisme. Pourquoi cela?
It is because this economy, to produce goods for consumption in surplus, is actually using the capacity of the planet, exploiting its resources, and hinders its capacity to regenerate and transfers the mechanisms of debt in the future. So this economy of presentism and the economy of hindrance makes that our communities have to strive, and the living needs to be rethought, in its ends, its objectives, and its ways of functioning. That's why I'm proposing an economy of the living. And my second point is, what could an economy of the living look like? And it's referring us back to the utopia. An economy of the living is an economy that would not affect, or would not affect anymore, the equality in the living. So the negantropic concept. So we have processes, plural, artificial processes that have delayed the entropy of life. So it would be negantropic. An economy of the living would be based on a re-evaluation of all the sectors of our economic life, based on the contribution to life, health, care, well-being, social cohesion, but mostly preserving the living and sustaining life. It's not here about praising the limitations of the economic life to the biological needs. That's not how I conceive it, but the needs of the spirit are important because it's part and parcel of life. Culture is also essential to our societies, but also ask the question to the utility and necessity of goods that are produced. Are they necessary? Are they useful to sustain life? And their mode of production, how are they produced? Their social impact and their environmental impact. So these three questions before production, we had lessons from COVID-19, which made us talk about the value of the economic system as it is. We realized that the nurses, doctors, bus riders have seen the essential character of health in our lives during the COVID-19 pandemic, and we know that they are the less remunerated ones in the economic system. The intermediaries are overpaid, the bullshit jobs are overpaid, the captive markets are overpaid, and those who contribute to feed and sustain life are overpaid. So one of the work that we could do is to reevaluate the value of the job market, and re-evaluating this could contribute to sustaining life, preserving our environment, our collective intelligence, the production of knowledge, and the culture of the spirit. So we can have another set of criteria to evaluate the value of what we do based on what maintains and sustains life. Are these activities neutral in carbon emission? And do we align our activities to the cycle of the biotop and its regeneration? And here we are talking about the necessity to cater for the needs of human communities and do away with a community that is anthropocentered, so based on the human being, and puts him at the center. So we cannot inscribe all this in a cosmopolitics of the living, which means that we should think of all the aspects of the living at the scale of the planet. How do we articulate the social orders, the economic orders, political, social, cultural, etc. Third point, how do we do that? I'm borrowing a concept, the symbiotic economy by Isabel. It was developed by Isabel. She will tell you more about it, but I will borrow her concept. The symbiotic economy is an economy that is in symbiosis with the natural orders, the social, technological, and economic orders. That's what she calls symbiotic economy, which does not affect the social orders, the environmental and relational orders. It regenerates itself. It's quite new, and it affirms the possibility of developing a symbiotic relationship. And the symbiotic relationship is mutual growth. We said that bonds can be negative, but the symbiotic relationship is that the two elements that are in the relation grow with this relation. What she's saying is that it could be an economy that would develop the symbiosis between the natural systems and in all areas. Now, to do so, what are the prerequisites? Before we get there, we need to change criteria. We need to change paradigm and scale of value. Before realizing this utopia, we have to set criteria, a scale of values, indicators, and a set of actions. The international division or distribution of work has made of emerging nations producers of raw materials that are processed in the industries in the Western country, and the added value is transferred to the North. Now, we need to see what is the measure of such value added, including the costs on social and environmental settings. Now, the system of values and the criteria that are set are giving us figures or indicators that do not reflect the economic situation. So we are in a false system, a false accounting system that does not really reflect the costs and denominates inadequately its assets and liabilities. And the cost should reflect the content in carbon. What we call economic growth is actually decreasing human growth. So what we are trying to do is to carry out an epistemological work, and in the imaginary world we need to ask the question as to know what is a good economy for the living or for life. And this shift in paradigm is indicating a change in normative regime, the analysis of evaluating the practices, and these practices exist already, the short circles, agroecology, etc., informal economy, etc. Now, these practices are not part of the system. They are located in areas which are seen as areas of resistance, rebellion, etc. Now, what are the questions at stake? Very quickly. One of the first questions is to ask if this new economic order, as we see in our experience in life and societies, Should it be systematic? Should we make it an order, a system? Because there's a plurality of practices that derive from this gesture. Should we make them homogeneous, or should we make people accept the plurality in the relationship to economy? We have the neoliberal system that is an extractive system and that favors anthropocentric nature of human beings. Now, the idea to make all these practices homogeneous, have a low frequency culture, would it be better than having a system of higher frequency and exchanging systems? That's one question. The second one is it possible to change our trajectory before the announced fall? That is the question regarding the situation. What would be the pushing factors, and how can we implement them without falling into catastrophe, into disaster, which would be a scenario to divert what we actually want to achieve? Can we achieve it? And I'll finish in a minute on the role of research for this, the role of academia, scholars, researchers in economy, ecology, environment, human sciences, artists, to rethink the imaginaries of a life that would be a good life. So their role, in my opinion, is to think new forms of lives, those that give a form to life, that receive it and sustain it. Think about sustaining life, but also its growth in quality, density, richness, and dismantle the economic system as it is, because we have consumption systems, and in our systems we are able to live in this world, in other worlds, and in the other worlds where you're able to live, you do not see the implication of your gesture in there. You might have a healthy life but has bad consequences in other worlds. So how to de-automate the economic gesture and have this large community, a space where we have a large community, not just people from my country, my neighborhood, etc., that would be called Euro America, for instance. And thank you very much. Thank you, Felwin, for this presentation, this heterodox presentation, ecologist presentation, utopist on economic science. You talked about symbiotic economy, the work of Isabel. She wrote this book in 2017, and the subtitle is Regenerate the Planet, Economy and Society. She works with the University Dauphine, with Gaston Berger University, on a system of indicators measuring the regeneration of ecological resources, economic and social resources. Isabel will tell us more about transforming our economy to serve the living and in our places of life. Thank you very much. You have 15 minutes. Thank you. I would like to start by thanking Felwin Sarr and Achille Membe for inviting me. I'm also very much intimidated to be here. I'm honored, and it's a pleasure, a delight to be here. The exchanges are very rich, and as I was saying, I am very intimidated, as it was said this morning by panelists, because the thought and thinking is very productive here. And to talk about this topic, I believe that it's very important to measure the scope of not only the ecological, economic, and social crisis of these situations, but the crisis is a change of state to come back to the initial state, and we know that we will not come back to the initial stage of this anthropic economy. We know that where it's leading us to, and we're living in the construction of disasters, ecological disasters, social disasters, economic disasters, that themselves are intertwined. So we are in an economy of growth. even though there is a decrease if you look at the GDP, but it's degenerative growth, or bad growth that degenerates our places of life. Regeneration is different. When you are renewing your resources, you can do it the same way you're degenerating your places of life. Regeneration is when you are in a space and you take advantage of the resources, and you have the capacity to participate in what is being produced, not just the resources that are being processed, but yourself, your inner self. Because when you sleep, you wake up as a new person, and you will use your full potential capital and maybe produce better than yesterday, and even something new. That's your capacity to renew yourself, to have something new to produce. So an economy of regeneration is not an economy of renewal. It's not an economy of the closed cycle that would be regenerating or reproducing itself. It's a spiral. You come back to an initial state at every production site and produce new resources. It's one of the capacities of the living. So the question here is, how do we move from a degenerative growth like ours to regeneration growth? And I'm talking here about growth because when you look at the work that I've conducted in writing my book, the productive models, the trade models, social models that cater for the crisis or the disaster, the ecological disaster, the social disaster, the economic disaster, we realize that they function, they work the same way, and they will operate putting in place an ecosystem and a diversity of resources. If you have a farm, for instance, in monoculture scheme, of course, all the plants have the same needs and they will emit the same substances. So you will need to take the fertilizers from elsewhere. If you have a diversity of plants, of species, some of those plants, those species will be able to compensate what the others are bringing and produce the resources that the others need in a sort of intimacy of bonds. You are in a farm, for instance, that shares the same water source or circuit. This is what we call symbiosis. And the seedling that we were talking about earlier on, you have such similar phenomena of mutualization, pooling of efforts, etc. We talked about this morning. Under different forms, we talked about how this happened. Now, how to shape this makes the seedling, for instance, even though it's small cells, small microorganisms that are independent, operates or functions like an organism that, based on the regions, the currents, will have organs, but will have this common area, the diversity of species in integrity that will constitute flows of resources. And you will have something that you share that is common to all and does not belong to this one or the other. And that's how we have this regeneration of resources, be it individual, ecological, technical. You have these forms of diversity of economic actors, of industries, inhabitants, local authorities, town hall, local governments, companies that will work together without any centralized entity. There is no super seedling that will dictate the contact and what to do. This is how we should do it or not, but it's an infrastructure that is established, a digital infrastructure, for instance, a charter that we all understand, but you don't need a lawyer to read it, you don't need a judge to be a referee. So it will be a charter on which we will agree and have an infrastructure of meaning in order to cooperate. And this cooperates will be done in territories, as we said yesterday. So this cooperation will have a territory of flow of resources, for instance, catchment area of consumption with actors that have converging or similar interests and common values, a same imaginary or imagination. They will share values, ecological values, social values, but that will be quite scarce. Very often, they have the same values because they understand each other, they speak the same language, they are from a same culture. The territorial identity has a structuring effect in these economies. This is an economy that cannot grow infinitely, not from a same organ, and we realize that this will have the actors that will talk to each other directly, and in this setting we are limited by what is known, and usually it's 150 people, and beyond 150 people you do not know each other. And the same goes for social networks. It's like similar to social networks. So it's an economy that looks like ecosystems. When you're told that a growth is limited, you have this size, this ecosystem needs to reach this size. Yes, it's true, but each time the tree starts with the seeds, the ecosystem starts with the seeds that are spread by the birds, oceans, rivers, and it will regenerate under different forms with the same structure in other climate systems. And we realize that these structures will regenerate. I'll give you the example of an actor in the hydrogen sector, and when I was publishing my book, he made of it a symbiotic enterprise. It was one of the first experiences when I published my book, and I'll talk about him. So it's not an economy of supply. For example, what happened with oil, you cannot store oil. So for oil, you have to create the demand in order to sell the supply that you have in your plant, for instance. Now he's referring to the needs, and he worked on a small commune where fuel had become the first source of expense for the municipality, because in that commune in Bretagne, the elders were many in the community, and there was a rise in employment due to mobility issues. So they did what they call transportation à la carte, so on demand. They had buses, drivers to enable mobility for the communities. Now, he proposed a fleet of cars that would be assembled on site with batteries to promote renewable energies that were not always available on grid, and he created an ecosystem based on the needs and opportunities of the territory. There were agro businesses. If you have, for instance, an hydrogen electrode in water that is composed of organic matters, you'll be able to use oxygen if you can commercialize it, because there are great lobbies around oxygen. But you produce and you consume hydrogen, so you have counterproduction as well. And that's what is happening in digital networks. In digital networks, whenever you comment, you consume somehow the network, you produce it, and each time you set up an agroecologic farm, you produce the resource the same way you consume it, because you increase the organic matter or resources of the soil, and you regenerate biodiversity, and you enable a settling of temperature, not too low, not too high. and you reduce the strength of the wind. And what happens is that those consumers of fruits and vegetables produced in settings that are different need a diversity of consumers in order to sell this diversity of production that you need for the balance. So you need a diversity of consumers because we are all interlinked, and this can grow. I gave you the example of hydrogen, but in Africa, in Senegal, in Germany, you find the same example because you will reproduce a logic in a given context with the resources that are available at that specific place and the needs, but we will apply a logic. I don't think I'll go further than this in describing this economy. What is interesting is that you realize that when you reflect on it, it has been replicated throughout the world, and it covers all needs, consumption goods, equipment, materials, food, energy, infrastructure, absolutely all sectors, all areas, and it also caters for the crisis to which the industry is confronted. And this economy, if we do not scale it up, we will not solve the problem. And we need many things. First of all, the question is to know if this allows for us to live on Earth with men. And I also wanted to talk about developing in an environment of competition to troubleshoot these disasters that we are confronted with. Is it possible to live in an environment where there's competition is prevailing? People with whom we do not agree, who put forth their structure and economic interest. Many companies want to change today, but they cannot do it. They can carry out the structural adjustments that are needed. So we need to have a setting where we increase prosperity and the inhabitants, the companies, enterprises, municipalities can work together. So we need the scaling up. What is interesting nowadays, very interesting indeed, is that we know this, and Felwin said it, our economy is not at all adapted to our environment. And what is interesting is that our environment is no more adapted to our economy, which means that for any reason, health, crisis, a boat in the Suez Canal that wreaks a war in Ukraine led by Russia, extra. You have a disappearance or a rupture of the supply chains and the components, and it's the whole sector, the automobile sector, that is affected. In this economy, you have ecosystems that are created around hydrogen, around, for instance, a car, around a farm, for instance, an energy system. And we need to do something that is fundamental. If you want to regenerate, you do not need to possess your objects, because when you work with the manufacturers, with the community, the inhabitants, you can put in place systems of cars or mobile phones. Like my phone, for instance, I have it in my pocket. It's quite wary, but I'm the one using it, and the phone does not belong to me. So the components are transferred back to the manufacturers, and they'll be used more than 15 times in new circuits, and they will be used locally. And because I'm in a cooperative, I have access to the economic model, because the investment is open to users, and there is no capturing of the values. There is a sort of symbiosis in the interests, and this model is good for the supply crisis that we have. It enables to relocate production to the entities, to not be sent to landfills, but rather recycled. And to have industrial systems, as I was saying, for hydrogen that would be autonomous but can also be replicated, exported in the capital, in the structure. And that is what is happening. This company co-invests for the same system in Berlin with the communities, the inhabitants, the locals, etc. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Isabelle.
Thank you very much, Isabel, for pursuing the utopia. Let me say something. It's not a utopia. It's a transtopia, because this system exists across the world. And when you go to a shared garden, a water treatment plant, etc., an assembly plant, etc., you will see that you will change the world, and the change is occurring.
En réalité, je voulais dire merci.
Reality, thank you very much for pursuing utopia in the real world. You have guessed the entire, what I would say as an Fatou Sow, next speaker, is a researcher at Sheikh Anta Diop University, and in terms of feminist research in Africa, and Gender and Fundamentalism in Codestria 2018. Thank you, Fatou Sow. You have about 15 minutes. Thank you very much. Now, I will blame Fermin Fall, Kanwesar, and Ashin Benwe for refusing to speak in our language, because I feel a bit uncomfortable. But let me say that if my Feli Monozo, Suleiman Bashir Jain, my favorite philosopher, found this very complicated. If our national Goncourt winner says cosmopolitical concept is difficult, and I can admit that cosmopoetics is a new word. I'm retired from the academy for a number of years. Co-feminism was familiar to me as a researcher, open to rereading things from a feminist angle, and I could imagine the economy of the living. But now that I have listened to Felwin, I have a better understanding, listening to him for a few minutes. But the combination, cosmopoetics, ecofeminism, and economy of the living, I was a bit disturbed. So I called him, and since he is a teacher, he not only explained the meaning but gave me, told me how to use the word, and I therefore will use that word according to his instructions in my discussion with you. Now, there is a sentence that I found very active, meeting from the beginning, from the inside and outside. In my head, I still have a few questions about the cosmos of Jean Lavin. I'm not sure whether it's the cosmos of Muslims, or when you have fasted, you have a right to dates and milk, etc. But these are subsidiary issues, and I have a few thoughts derived from my research in the 1980s, 1990s, when thinking about women and gender was very difficult in our intellectual circles. Some thought that it was nonsense. and feminism was actually not considered as a proper word to use. So now we have also issues about land use, land issues, natural resources, and women, because women are here, they're present. Now I don't know whether you remember all those issues about using coal, improved furnaces, and women fetching water in a single tap in the village, and climate change had already begun. It wasn't called that in the Sahel, but in this Sahel of poor countries, Mauritania, Senegal, Burkina Faso, Niger, Chad, who had a basic question to resolve of hunger. They couldn't because there was hunger, and the poor use that Felwin mentioned. And in 1973, we even created the SILS, the Institute for Research on Drought in the Sahel. So we did environmental degradation. So with dwindling supplies of water, intensive plantations, coastal erosion, the misery and poverty of the people. Human action on the environment has never been as critical in its demonstration of the close link between people and the manner in which they used the living spaces. I think Felwin and Isabel also demonstrated it quite clearly. So never have we had this need to rethink the space and reconciling our thought and the planet and rethinking our bodies and the cosmos with an exclamation mark on our resources. Now, I, as a feminist, I think it is not strange to ask whether men and women have the same relationship with the environment. Or questioning these relations about the management. And we talked about terre, mer, earth, Mother Earth, Mother Earth. I'm not opposing men and women here. And Mother Earth is a common term used in literature. I saw it in an article in 40 years ago by a colleague who wrote an article on Mother Earth about the indigenous populations in Canada and explained how these populations had preserved the environment and fought for the rights and their access to citizenship, which was denied them in Canada. So I will explain why I use that word. Now, terre des hommes also, it's the earth of men. And now I think you have it becomes such a term when your production does not is not used to nourish the earth and the people who live on it. And we used to talk about development sociology at the time. At the time, we used to feed ourselves on maize, corn, etc., depending on where you live. But when we imposed the cash crops, we acquired the control by those who exploited the earth and who were controlled by an economic system which imposed new laws. And here you can underscore the patriarchal nature of this new economy, which becomes one of men, and it became a masculine economy. women worked, but they did not make any decisions. And then you have the plantation economies with these women participating in this masculinity of production. And we know that the attitude of women affected women, and they are the managers of the earth, whatever the social system, whether it's patrilineal or matrilineal. And this is what Paul Njai said, a colleague, a geographer, colleague from the University of Dakar. Mother Earth, Terre des Hommes, is a social construct, an African research. And such a workshop here in Saint Louis, for example, during the African Resource Matters Symposium, rethought and prompted us to rethink an environment with a new order. I think we need to come back to that to survive. We need that, but we also need to cast a critical eye, which is very, very important. It's true that human beings manage spaces, delimit their territory, and there's a socio-cultural, economic reconstruction of a territory, which is the result of a world view, and it's a product of history, and is a framework where there are relations, physical and social, with animals and living things and human beings. But relationship to the earth is above all a way of being, of living, of thinking and acting. And the earth is a source of life, and human beings have with it bonds. I don't want to use genius, it's a folklore, but or skills, we can say, but rather talk about ancestors, which give a meaning to the earth as a vital good that cannot be owned like an object. You can own maybe a land in a city, but in majority of our rural areas, we have the land seen as a production good for producing that communities use, which has a cosmic and spiritual value. And Achille, I turn to Achille and Fenwin, we have all material control will depend on the metaphysical control there of the earth, linked to the cosmos. There are codified rituals, sacrifices, etc., which found the relationship, and this metaphysics of the land is all the more powerful as the roots of the land. I'm looking for a word. Animistic? Should I say animistic? They were caricatured by using the word, and I talk about the land, and with the religions that remained for a long time very strong despite the presence of Islam, and in the practices are adapted to modernity of contemporary resources. When you sacrifice an animal, you offer kola nuts, etc., and when you begin building a house and living in a house, you conduct those rituals. You read the Quran, for example, on other practices, such that you make the area blessed before you live there. What about women? Now, for women, it's important to say that in Africa, there's a difference. Well, there are specific links between women and nature, and this you have the idea of Mother Earth that you find actually everywhere. You find in all our mystical stories and even our national anthems, like in the national anthem of Senegal. And this system of beliefs and values, which are both moral, religious, and cultural, women's relation to the earth also have that spiritual dimension, but also an ambivalent and ambiguous relation. African civilizations have made the earth a feminine word, and the nature is the locale where the feminine principle is embodied. It gives life and nourishes this earth. In African imaginary, women fertilize the land, make it flower and produce to nourish people. They sow. In Wolof, we say melindeam, that is which grows within its mother. And here we beautify with myths and rituals the beauty of a woman's body, which raises issues because we could ask, but what is the use? I only have 3 minutes left, so let me conclude, but we'll discuss later. Now, it's an essentialist vision, which reductive because it exposes women's body, their reproductive role, it's showcasing them while maybe diminishing their role in care. But are we going to continue doing care anyway as a uterus, as a mother? Fertilizing the land corresponds to fertilizing the earth under the burden imposed by men. You have the devaluation of feminine tasks, the sexual division of labor. Now you find also this use of this symbol of what a mother is, because you find, with respect to the environment and the land as social constructs, you find that Africa is one of the few continents where land systems transit through mothers and women. You have the right to transfer land, etc. And the functions of authority in our kingdoms, you find that land is transmitted through women but not to women. And this is very, very important. And of course, once we have looked at all these aspects attaching women's functions, I'm not a philosopher, so to this ontology of what the land is, Mother Earth, you have populations which tend to say Africa is very strong. We talk about the major replacement, with Africans thinking that Africa is growing in terms of producing all these new intellectuals. That is a wealth, population bulge, this youth bulge is a wealth. But these populations come from the uterus of women, and maybe women also need time to do something else apart from reproducing that population. Last point, the economic order. He's new, and Achille has also a nephew. We have a nephew. I have a lot of nephews here. So let me conclude. In the face of the issues confronting us, and I'm not going to talk about the Green Belt movement of Margaret Matai, etc., of the women and environment crisis, women of the Global Congress Agenda 20-something. Over 40 years, women have not stopped discussing the environment and the impact of the environment on the economy of the living, but on themselves as living beings. Of course, what we should ask today is, can we have a better life? And at what cost? At what cost for women? We're asking for care and sustaining our families, but how to do it if the role of women continues to be free of charge? If we're still talking about contraception and problems with contraception, and if the right to abortion is curtailed, and there are such contradictions, if democracy, which we thought that we had obtained with the parity law in Senegal, that women would become more mayors, more MPs, there's still a long way to go. So, yes, what is the cost of sustaining the economy of the living?
Merci beaucoup, Tanti.
Thank you very much, Tanti. My aunt, Mama. Tanti is French. You say Mama. Thank you, Mama, for reminding us that the human cost of this poorly functioning economy is a cost for women. We'll open the discussion for 20 minutes. Let us take 2 questions here, from here and from the back. And then the panel will close. The microphones are here. Yes. There's a question from here. The second one will be from the back. Okay, the 2 of you there. You and you here. And behind, it will be you. And then you. Okay, I'll be biased for the women, for the benefit of the women. Thank you very much. I have 2 questions. The first is for Philwin. The economy you are describing, for me, has one obstacle. What the economists call the clandestine passages. So we see the cost of that, and everybody will share the cost if we reduce our emissions. What the problem is, a problem in adopting all those measures. Now, the last speaker, Fatou Sow, my question is, what you are describing, the situation of women, if I have understood you, is the situation of rural women. We know that Africa is urbanizing more and more. Is it the same situation you're describing, the same situation encountered by urban women? Last question. Since your latest research, what is the situation in women, of African women? Do you think the status of African women has improved? Thank you, Madam. There, the microphone for you. Please go ahead. I have a question regarding the mission of the living. Isn't the problem about the definition of the living? By definition, the human, in quotes, is what you find in all our environments, and whether we like it or not, we are expected to interact. And Hamilton shows us that everything we have done will provoke a reaction which we may not be able to control. This is how the universe operates. So when you talk about economy, you look about what's happening in the past century and the 5 centuries of slavery, which is the explanation of predation. And if you look at history, from the 12th century, we know that Europe started destroying everything that was exotic, what we call animism, which means that we as Africans, animism, and here we're talking about our peoples. When you talk about animism, you are talking about humanity. You still respect the living. And the earth is considered as living. But the West abandoned this and was engaged in self-destruction. So it's a matter of redefining the living and our way of engaging in the economy of this living and saving the world. Thank you. A microphone there at the back.
Oui. Ok. Ok. À lui. Ok. Allez-y, je vous prie.
Please go ahead. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for your presentations. I have several questions. One for Felwine Sall and Isabelle Delannoy. You criticize the economies and propose alternatives. How is this criticism seen in academia today? I was at a conference on indicators, and they're talking about alternative indicators. And it's not always accepted in academia. And since they're working on indicators, that group, Felwine Sall, can you say that today we can create more relevant indicators for the European or African continent, or what should we do in the context of these different dynamics? And how are people trained in economics today? Today, we have criticisms of the old theses, and Isabelle Delannoy. I come from university that is very concerned with bioresources, University of Reims, and they're talking about an alternative idea of plants, and is this sustainable? Thank you very much. Thank you, your neighbor, almost neighbor. Thank you very much for your contributions. I'd like to use the metaphor that you yourself proposed between the land, the earth, which contributes Mother Earth, and in relation to your contributions, Felwine Sall and Isabelle Delannoy, because as you said, it seems to me that you are thinking about characterizing a new mode of human contribution to the earth. And what you're proposing is to acknowledge the contribution of the earth as a mother, as a woman. Now, your metaphor, I'd like to ask you how to recognize the contributions of our environment and how to pay women for what they are doing when they contribute to our lives. I'm talking about the forests especially, which produces the oxygen that we breathe, and the contribution of our rivers with what they produce for our benefit, etc. Microphone is breaking. I'm sorry, we can't hear.
Pour reconnaître la contribution des milieux à nos vies. Comment on leur paye leur dû.
Merci. En principe,
Thank you. Uncorruptible, but I think there's an injustice which I'd like to correct by giving her exceptionally the floor. Please bring the microphone here before the panelists respond. Thank you. Microphone, please. Microphone. Aïe, aïe, aïe.
Dire, c'est aussi, mais je n'ai pas le texte là, mais je ne vais pas le dire parce que j'ai peur de me tromper. C'est tout simplement, en fait, je pense que c'est compréhensible par tout le monde. La poésie, ce qu'on appelle la poésie ou la poétique, ne se réduit pas à des sonnets à des quatrains en fait. La poésie, elle est dans nos danses, elle est dans les incantations qu'on fait aux ancêtres, les incantations aux plantes, avant de prendre une plante, que ce soit en Amazonie, que ce soit dans les forêts du bassin du Congo.
Merci.
C'est trop vite, je parle pas beaucoup.
Merci. Merci.
Juste pour terminer, justement pour faire le rapport aussi.
To finish, to establish the relationship with you, the breath of ancestors is the best expression for that, and the dances of Aristonians, which are cosmic dances, to move away from earthly cosmology. Sorry, I have to stop you because you are raising a lot of issues, and I'm sorry to stop you because we want to allow our panelists to answer to the questions. So 3 minutes to the panelists to react to the questions and comments. Felwin, over to you. Thank you, Seydou. I don't think there is a problem when it comes to clandestine passengers because when what we learn in neoliberal economies that all the profit should be shared as far as payment of such is concerned. But I think that there are people that will receive profit from actions that were led by others without having interfered in the mechanism of the market of prices. When we talk about the culture of the clandestine, we adhere to the market by the tariffs exclusively. That's what we teach in economy, and we need to reject this theory. And this is taking us back to the question of the student from Reims. How do we teach in economy paradigms that are not based on the centrality of the mechanism of the distribution by the tariffs and value that the market gives? We can establish green and blue markets. We are borderless. We are in borderless spaces, but from where we are, we can regenerate the planet without being in a mechanism of compensation by tariffs. So it's an axiology that needs to be rejected. Now, the living. A definition could be simple, and the substance of it comes from what it takes from its environment, and this is what differentiates it from the unanimated objects. And it is transformed in energy to maintain its structure. That is the living. The living ensure its regeneration, its development by metabolizing resources of its biotope, and to remain alive, it regenerates. Its capacity is one of the dimensions of life in itself. And we could use that to try and understand what the economy of the living is. Before we had the domination without sharing of the neocratic economy, in the logics of reproducing careers, if you were a heterodoxical economist, you didn't have enough room. But more and more in this system, the crises are forcing us to rethink the paradigms, and we are not at a stage where we have reviewed the curricula. And this is the responsibility of the economists that are in the systems, the universities, institutions, to introduce these notions, to criticize, for instance, the clandestine passenger or some fundamentals, introduce these concepts in their teaching, create research laboratories, and make sure that this situation is changed. But this is complex because we have logics of reproduction within the system. It's very often when we have attained a certain level in the system that you can criticize. We are moving forward, however. Now, how people are trained in the economy. You are right. Our environment contributes, and an economy that is not anthropocentric will not be a contributing agent or a representative agent. I do not like this term, but I'll use it. Elements of the environment and recognize their contribution. My fear is for this recognition to pass through the system of tariffs. We need a system of equivalence and values, because there will be economists that will tell you that they paid in dollars what they receive from their environment. And we need to be innovative. How to create trade and equivalent systems is, if we let this economy reinvent itself and have a biodiversity to accelerate it, we are giving back the capacity that it gave us. So donation and counter-donation that does not exist in the mechanism of tariffs. That is possible. That was it. Thank you. Isabelle, over to you. We have to be conscious that these are emerging issues and we are moving towards the same concepts. For the last IPCC concept, we read that there are two significant pillars to respond to climate change: systems based on adaptation, biodiversity, mitigation, biotechnology, and inclusiveness. Saying that because climate change is affecting the poorest, and the poorest are part of the solution. And that's what I believe. That's what my observations are leading to. And this triptych, these three sets of actors between communes, localities, and inhabitants is the same. And we have this report that is based on observations, because that's how the IPCC works, but the actors do not know how to translate it into reality. I was not able to conduct my research at the university because they did not understand what I was saying. All these solutions, between brackets, were not perceived by the academic environment. At that time, we did not understand economy of solidarity, circular economy, etc. And now they're taking these concepts. It's being established. It's not very transdisciplinary because with the Museum of Natural History I work, and it's not quite frequent that we have economy and ecology at the same time. Today we have many theses on symbiotic economy. I'm writing my first thesis project just to say that things are moving, we are digging deeper, we are researching based on our fields of expertise, and I think that there is some dimension of humility and capacity to invent that is greater than 10 years ago. And the question is now to fast track all this, to accelerate it, and the indicators will enable us to actually guide financing, be it public or private, towards this economy. The same answer for the student from Reims. Who knows? Who knows what is the best system? We are learning from each other, and the models are smaller versions of the reality. And on the economy of the living, that's what we are looking for. We are actually attempting to define it without knowing it all. And you talked about what is making us, what is shaping us, and how we live with the universe. We have our skin that is regenerating every 21 days, etc. You have the iron that enables to maintain your hemoglobin. That's the same one that is actually used in photosynthesis. We had stars that exploded in conditions of fusion to have these atoms that were disaggregated or disseminated in the universe. I was discussing this with a friend on the issue of dread with the universe. It's difficult to understand because I have not felt that. I was thinking that it was not a quantitative thought, this dread with the distance of the universe. Maybe it is what the living is about, these very intimate bonds, relationships, these strong and weak bonds, to have assembling, molecular assembling, and start from there. I don't know what the living is. Today, if there is one thing in which we are underdeveloped as the Western world, and this gentleman said it in natural history, it's the living. We are underdeveloped when it comes to the living. Thank you, Isabelle Felwin. 30 seconds to answer to a question that you missed before we give the floor to Fatou. So, Felwin, 30 seconds. It's on the indicators. I omitted that question. We can have general character indicators, and the work of Isabelle will be to work on indicators for the symbiotic indicators. We have the geosyncratic indicators in Senegal, indicators that will come from the continent, take into consideration the visions of the continent. They have produced the first report, so there is ongoing work. And we can have quantitative indicators, qualitative indicators, and there will be dimensions that will be based on what we cannot measure, so not reflected in the indicators. Fatou, so over to you for your answers. I don't know if I had questions put up to me, but the first one is how to establish the link between Mother Earth, the fact that the Earth is producing, women are producing, there's a lot of mingling. Men also produce a lot. We have maternity, biological reproduction. They are the economists, and I'll ask Felwin to help me in my attempt to explain. I'll give a few tips or hints, and I hope that it will be useful. Women in Africa, I'm talking about African women because I do not want to talk about the others. So, women have a status that makes our strengths and also our deep weakness. Men are reproducing through us. We recognize the power of men and their descendants through women. And we know that women have control, their bodies are control spaces. We have all this discourse around women, their empowerment, their maternity. And we have this pressure on the other hand, which is mandatory maternity, because you only become a woman when you give birth. And this I've tried to translate or make evident, visible in my writings or the African settings where I work. For some time, I was the daughter of, and then the sister of, and now I am the mother of. And I'm not being called madam anymore. I am called mom, because I'm a mother. I was lucky. I decided to be a mother in my own terms. For others, it was forced reproduction, as many feminists would say. But it is important to give it a meaning. So giving it a meaning outside of the bodies of women, but also in the economy, in politics, and all to which women are contributing, be it in the political, social, moral, metaphysical areas. So this answers to that question. Now you're talking about urban women. For this presentation, I chose rural women. For urban women, we will ask Felwin to organize another conference where I'll be invited to talk about urban women. It's another subject, another dimension, a different context, and we can start it all over again. But for that, I would like to thank you. I must say this because very often, after I speak, the reaction is, are you talking about rural women? Are you a rural woman? On behalf of whom are you talking? And I'm happy that you didn't ask that question. Now, it's not a shame to be ignorant. I would be happy to read what you write about cosmopolitics. I understood it better, but it's not enough for me to take part in a conference and give a presentation where I would associate cosmopolitics and ecofeminism and the economy of the living. But I'm waiting. I learn continuously. I continue to learn. Thank you. Thanks to our panelists. Felwin has this sentence that is very beautiful, and it's the right fit for conclusion. He says that the economy of the living is not the economy of reproduction. Thank you and enjoy your lunch.